All right, let's talk about privatization. We have an article at Salon taking a big fat dump of obviously very lopsided about the problems with privatization. Now, the issue is they are not balanced. Because, like, even from like the headline, from prisons to running water, parking meters, privatization has mostly been a disaster. It's time to change course. But of course, if they were honest, they would realize that mostly everything is private. From the clothes they wear to the food they eat, that they fucking like the vodka they enjoy, every almost 99% of interactions in America are private. But yet somehow these sacred little, like from education to roads or whatever, they're so sacred that it just rubs them the wrong way that it's not government controlled. Now, if I was to be honest completely, I mean, there if this article was honest as well, it would definitely list the many things that are private and are awesome. But they're not honest. Obviously, they're like I guess they're the mirror opposite of Reason magazine or whatever, So they can't list one single good example of a good private interaction. So everything they whatever, it's all concerning, and it's all bad. But from an objective standpoint, they would never ever talk about the real issue, which is incentives. And that why mostly private goods are better goods. And that is whoever's paying the money gets the best service. I mean, I spent some time at the DMV lately, and these government employees, as funny as they were, I will say this: they had their own nasty, dark humor about them. Because I came into that DMV expecting the worst, expecting the most self-hating, self-loathing type of people that like prison guards that would try to condescend to you, and I was with the lowest expectations, bare bones. I was a little bit pleasantly surprised because they were nasty in a way. Like they talked to people in such a rude ass way that if they were working at a private business, they would have long term been terminated. They know they can't lose their job, and they're fucking pricks. Just put it just bluntly. But they had a really dark office humor about them, which I kind of appreciated. But at the same time, you have to have your standards and expectations rock bottom. And the moral of my story is these people at Salon would never, ever, ever mention the issue of public goods fucking suck too. Actually, even suck way more than private goods. Well, why? It's because if the if you're not the customer, well, technically you're supposed to be the customer, but you're really not, because the actual person that's paying for the good, you are indirectly paying for it. Yes, you are still the customer. You're paying for public goods with your taxes, but indirectly. But whoever's directly paying for it is the real customer, and they will serve to please that customer. But that's just a little bit of honesty, a little bit of clarity that a propaganda website like Salon would never mention. But let's get into it. So somebody wrote a book about the privatization of everything. Dum dum dum. So my first highlighted quote here is, but slowly but surely, it dawned on me that the authors had articulated a sound, sensible, compelling vision about realize the promise embedded in the preamble of the U.S. Constitution, quote, to promote the general welfare. And that's where it goes off the rails. The article goes off the rails immediately. Even though, yes, the preamble to U.S. Constitution says to promote the general welfare. By today's standards, the founding fathers were libertarian as fuck. They did not mean promote the general welfare of having free fucking universal basic income and you just fucking like welfare and all this other shit. So this is a complete canard. If they were to read in the historical, promote the general welfare, that's so vague. That could be anything. That means you can have the USSR, you could have the Chinese fucking whatever. There's no limits to general welfare. Everything could be described as general welfare. So obviously that's not what they meant. All right, moving on. Trickle down economics doesn't work. But build up does. Biden listening? Of course he is. He's a fucking socialist. So they're asking this author, you repeatedly make the point that privatization is more expensive, even when it appears cheaper up front. This is glaring obvious in one way, since private investors routinely expect... that is just so bullshit and so wrong. Everything that the government does is so much more expensive. You don't have to be a genius. Even just give an example. California with the homeless. $60,000 or $80,000 per tent for a social distance tent. When California, the state wants to put a homeless person in a private room, they pay $5,000 for the fucking room. Or $800,000 for a unit, like a homeless unit. How can they, in clear conscience, say that everything about privatization is more expensive? It's such garbage. Welfare fraud or Medicare fraud is greater than all of profits from the health insurance industry. So how? Again, I have to understand this is a propaganda website. They're like, if anything, if somebody was like a true believer in welfare and government or whatever against privatization, okay, I understand that. But if you're an objective person without ideology, you have to understand that privatization for most things is way better than the government providing something, right? So it would be at least a nuanced argument. Not here. Salon goes, absolutely. Businesses have legitimate business expenses as well as pretty high executive compensation packages. Fuck me, Jesus Christ. In the millions, depending on the corporations. They have returns to investors, profit. But profit is way cheaper than just milking taxpayers. If you fail, don't fail, how many customers you serve, it doesn't matter. You have no incentives. You're just giving away not your money. They have political expenses, lobbying, and also debt because they're involved in merging acquisitions. Or if that's the case, you have to look at service being provided. Say, okay, let's say they can do it cheaper, but they're taking a bunch of money out. I ask a question all the time. What are you going to spend less on? They can spend less on absolutely everything because everything the government does is overinflated. That's what we can spend less on. Salaries, consultant fees. I mean, I can guarantee you that if I got like even a fraction of California's budget that we used to for homelessness, I could just house every fucking homeless there is. They say they're efficient, but efficient is just spending less to get more. Okay, no shit, Sherlock. That's the final list of things you can spend less on. Okay, well, all right, dumbass. You could always spend more. You can always waste more money. Duh. You could have fewer workers, which they do. It happens to be private prisons. They have a higher ratios of prisoners to corrections officers. You can pay them less, lower wages, fewer benefits, which they do. You can use lower quality equipment supply. How about you can actually, in a private setting, fire people that don't perform? On the government setting, you can't do that. I mean, I hear like retorts from socialists. They always want to bring up the NFL. Well, the NFL is a socialist organization. They always let the losing teams give them the first round draft pick. Well, like, that's not an example. The NFL ruthlessly fires non-performing athletes. Well, what do you have in your analogy? How does that relate? Can we fire welfare queens? Another theme that recruits in your pocketbook is how public goals and private incentives are routinely at odds. Private prisons are a prime example. Should we understand this problem? What example do they do more generally? Private prison companies. See, like the whole thing about like they're stuck on private prisons, which is imprisoning people. That's not really quite a private action anyway. So I don't necessarily like private prisons. But they're not private anyway because the government uses the power of the state to imprison people. In a corporation, like a true private corporation, like you have no choice not to go to a private prison, unlike you have a choice not to go to McDonald's. So if a government hires a private institution with like a profit motive to run a prison, it's not really a private institution. The government is their customer, so they become just like a wing of the bureaucracy. But that's just imprisoning people is not an example of voluntary interactions. So it's why do they? Obviously, they wanted to have a strawman example against private interactions, but it's not. This is not one of them. After introductory section, you write first about public goods for life, the public dangers of privatizing health and public health. Dangers of privatizing public health. Fuck, it's not your public health. It's people's individual health. Water and food safety. Well, motherfuckers, like, most food you eat is safe. And all the most of the 99% of the safety comes from private industries that monitor their own food safety. There's not enough government inspectors. Like, if you use a hammer, it's your own responsibility that you hit use the hammer to hit your fucking hand, right? There's not a government inspector. There's not enough government inspectors to monitor every single action of a person. So most of safety, 99.999% of safety, comes from private monitoring of oneself and the environment. What's so hard to wrap your hand around that? Why these public goods and what the harm results from failing to recognize them as such? Well, here we go. Today we'll have a start with COVID because we all think we'll all talk about it's consumed our latest 2 years. Trump's first conservative and probably corrupt reaction was leave it to the market. State will go on the market and find protective equipment and testing equipment, and that's how things should work. It was a miserable failure. No, you numbnuts. The CDC clearly failed because all that Europe and Asia, they had COVID tests that were working, that weren't like at the highest quality, but you don't need the highest quality. They were banned in America. A lot of the solutions to COVID were actually banned in America because the government agencies will recognize quickly, even the administration, when it created Operation Warp Speed, they needed government coordination. If there's one lesson from COVID, we should be clear that health of all of us depends on the health of each of us. This fucking Marx bullshit from each to coordinating, from one to coordinating of his ability to coordinating of his needs. Like, this is Das Kapital shit. Again, the market only gets things to people who have resources to buy them. Well, no, not really. I mean, everybody has resources to buy things. But market has scarce resources and use the price mechanism to allocate shit. But at the same time, I mean, does the government do a better job? No. And then on the flip side, we talk about Kansas City deciding to offer free transit. There's recognition of that mobility is something we all need. It's all good because we get people out of cars. We save the planet. We made a decision on that, how to pay for that. We don't pay for use the roads to get in a car and go to the grocery store. We decided to pay that through taxes. If you could decide and do the same thing for transit, we decided to pay for... Motherfucker, like, a lot of it, like, except for the exception of, like, New York and Chicago, 2 cities, public transit is unusable. I'm from Los Angeles, all right? And to use a public transit to get from one city to another will take 3 hours. Unworkable, unmanageable. Because why? Well, even though the planners had the best intention in mind, the problem with government solutions is you have politics involved. Well, guess what? Some neighborhoods like Beverly Hills or whatever, West Hollywood, they don't want transients. They don't want a metro line going through their city, so they sue and block the development. So, and on top of that, we have so many stops that there is technically public transit to go from point A to point B, but it's so slow and it's so inefficient a way of getting there that, I mean, what do you expect? The car is better. I'm sorry. Your next section is about shredding the social safety net and how that generates worse inequality. How do you define public goods in that context? I would say it's economic security. There's some level of economic security we should aspire to create for everyone. No, we should not. Because people should have some level of security. They do better in life and will do better. Like, no, I reject that completely. Out of hand. Absolutely not. The more welfare people get, the more dependent they get on it, okay? So we should do that through the safety net. It goes to be a conversation about freedom. Oh, yeah, about freedom. How the fuck are you going to have some freedom if you have such burdensome taxes for the people that actually do want to work? They have to provide for all the people that are not working. You're on your own to make it or not make it. Oh, this is too bad because the modern left has done away with deserving poor and undeserving poor. And if you don't make it, it's your fault. Too bad, right? Well, not in the United States. Why do you, in the United States you have unlimited welfare? Shouldn't you see that? Okay, well, maybe if it fell down your, I mean, I'm against all welfare completely, but all right, if you fell down your feet, you should get some welfare, right? But for 6 months, a year, we have eternal welfare, and that's obviously used as a voter base for the left. But when we think about freedom, I don't know anybody that feels free if they're burdened by tens of thousands of dollars student debt. That's a government creation. Or by healthcare. No, I'm not burdened by student debt or healthcare. I'm fucking burdened by your fucking taxes. So when we don't provide a safety net, we're basically saying to people that are on their own, healthcare is expense, college expense, child care, which is considered for fucking child rearing is a fucking choice. Government has the power to change that just through its own spending. It has less and less power, and thank God. $2 trillion is spent every year by governments in America, producing contracts and goods, supplies. We can make sure these goods, but often they're not. We're actually using our tax dollars to drive inequality. You can flip that around. President Biden has finally signed the executive order requiring a $15 wage for federal contractors and their living wage policies in Los Angeles, all across the country, that require higher wages for subcontracts. That's a recognition the government has a role in creating inequality or resolving it. I mean, this just paragraph has so much things wrong with it. I don't even know where to say. Where to even start. The next section of your book seems to have a broader concept in mind. How privatization erodes community. Explains what you mean by that and what the core concern is. It's the opposite. Government control erodes community because the community is built on mutual reliance. But a lot of mutual aid organizations and charities went away when the government just took over welfare. It's about democracy. We're consumers of public services, and there's ethic and a value structure to our citizens also. We have obligations to do our part and not to do harm to others. If people don't interact, there's no public place. You don't have an opportunity to understand each other's perspective. So parks, schools, libraries. What's with this fucking libraries canard? Do you know anybody that went to a library in the last 10 years? Like, this is a serious article. And you're supposed to take these arguments seriously. And talk about fucking parks. Fucking land with grass that just needs to be mowed. And libraries. I mean, school is a completely different topic. Those are the places where we interact, and those critically important. I love the huge bait and switch. Like, oh, you like libraries? You like parks? Oh, then you need to get taxed 60% of your income because we're going to provide all this welfare. Like, fucking libraries and parks, they're a rounding error. They're 0.001% of the fucking government budget. The whole budget goes to welfare. So why do you even mention that? This sense of community is critically important to develop trust. This is awful, awful article. First, when it comes to true believers, the libertarian conservative ideologists, that's me, who really have a different view of what government should be. I like to use Milton Friedman quote when it wasn't from 1950s, but more like aughts. In my ideal world, government would not be responsible for providing education any more than it's for providing food and clothing. Well, that's what they believe. Yes, I believe that. I don't want the government making Nikes. I don't want government making hoodies. And the government should stay the fuck away from education because it's just, once the government providing it, you're just inhaling pure propaganda. I was reading more than okay, and that's what they believe. I was reading an article morning about a legislator in Alabama who wants basically to dismantle the public education system, put all vouchers in the market. That's what they believe. But this is a good thing. Let the parents decide if they want to go to like a woke school, if they want to go to creationism school, Bible study, like whatever, man. Let the people decide. Free the people, and because they don't want to free the people, because they are afraid what the people are going to choose. Second, for corporations, it's a pot of gold. There's 7 trillion, 9 trillion spent every year by governments in America. It's a pot of gold. You're a big company and you see $750 billion spent on education or 150 billion spent on water or whatever. Go for it. You're a fun ideologist. Create pro-market anti. That is complete bullshit. The only reason they're not. Whoever wrote this article is a complete moron. The big corporations, they're not afraid of government. They're not afraid of idiot socialists like you. They are afraid of new and lean startups because it's just a fact of nature. The bigger an organization grows, whether it's government, which is way worse, but even a big corporation, private corporation, the more fat, the more wasteful they become, the more inefficient, the more bloat. So like a big corporation like AT&T or Spectrum or whatever, like Time Warner, they are afraid of lean startups because they know they'll get crushed on price. They're not afraid of fucking government, okay? So they're going to bribe government to crush its competitors. They don't bribe government to get into fucking, I want to provide water for the city. And then finally, there are conservative political folks that want to destroy unions and downsize the government, who see advantage in anti-government rhetoric and politics. They want to eliminate their opposition and perhaps help their friends. They may be true believers as well, but Grover Norquist, my hero, he's a strategist. He's not going to make money from contracting. But he's a strategist who says, quote, we need to get government so small enough we can drown in the bathtub. So those are the 3 forces that have driven this since the 1970s. Article written by Paul Rosenberg. Like I said before, if you're honest, like I can be honest, and I could see certain goods may be better provided by government, and most other goods best provided privately, right? You can have like a nuanced take on it. But of course, these propagandists would only try to point out, gaslight that the 99% of interactions you have in your life are awful. You're being taken advantage of by private greedy capitalists. And the solution would be to nationalize them, which is clearly bullshit.